The idea of a human being formed within another human, to me, is a miracle. I always say when I give talks in schools that I don't want to give a talk only to a girl, I want to give a talk to the boy too. At that young age, they need to understand what girls go through, have the
Right.
empathy towards them. There is no norm that if you get married at 30 or 35, you'll 100% have issues in pregnancy. No. I have 40 and 42-year-olds who have conceived completely on their own. Infertile couples are someone we deal with again holistically. They are sometimes being drained emotionally, mentally, financially, because a lot of them have a lot of myths regarding egg freezing. If I freeze my eggs, then I have to get pregnant in a certain manner. They will be re-injected within me. These are myths which need to be broken. You may be the best at what you do, but that's of no use unless people know you exist.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another session on Thinky Talks on the topic Business Networking with Vipul Bonda. I have a fabulous guest with me today who is going to talk about women's health and is an expert on women's health. So, I'll just give you a quick introduction of Tushna, and I'm sure as we go along, you'll get to know her even better. So, Dr. Tush, and this is in her own words, so I just read it as she has given it to me, so that it's just easier for me to read. She says, I'm Dr. Tushna Kanga Menon, an experienced obstetrician and gynecologist with over 13 years of dedicated practice. I am truly passionate about empowering women and assisting them in taking charge of their own health. My expertise lies in a wide range of areas related to women's reproductive health. I specialize in managing various conditions related to reproductive health, including but not limited to pregnancy management, including high risk cases, infertility management, menstrual disorders such as endometriosis, gynecological cancers, and cosmetic gynecology. I strongly believe in providing a holistic approach to your well being, ensuring that all aspects of your health are taken into account. I am here to support you, answer any questions you may have, and guide you in making informed decisions about your health. And she says, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any concerns and if you'd like to discuss your specific situation. Welcome, Tushna. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Let's begin at the very beginning, as they say.
Okay.
So, your family business is a travel business.
True.
You are a doctor. How did that happen? Who's your inspiration? What guided you to take up this complicated business of gynecology and obstetrician?
So yeah, it's true. I come from a business family. My family's business is tours and travels, but basically, I kind of had an idea in the final years of school itself that I wanted to enter medicine. I have a elder cousin sisters. Both of them are medicos. My aunt is a doctor, and basically they were my inspiration to get into this particular field. Choosing gynecology obviously happened once I entered MBBS as a field. The reason I chose gynac is I always felt, until today feel, the idea of a human being formed within another human in 9 months, to me, is a miracle. And I still get appalled by the whole, I get amazed with that whole journey. And that's one of the main reasons why I am in gynecology per se.
So I remember you mentioning once during our discussions, and you said it's a little known fact that gynecologists have the maximum stress among the medical community, especially during deliveries when things go wrong or go change rapidly.
Go down south,
And so,
yes.
can you just talk us a little bit, because this is something that most people, I'm sure, don't know, and they'll really appreciate what gynecologists do after you tell them. So, if you can tell that in your own words, I think that will make it much better.
So the thing is that obviously all fields of medicine are equally stressful and equally happy because we are dealing with patients and lives on a day-to-day basis. But the only thing is, as an obstetrician, when we are dealing with a pregnant woman, we are not dealing with one life, but dealing with one or two lives or three lives, depending on whether she has a singleton or a twin pregnancy. And obstetrics is one such field where things can change in a blink of an eye. unfortunately. As doctors, we are trained to deal with any complication and any emergency at the spur of the moment. But when it does happen, it is scary no matter how experienced you are and how many hours, such emergencies you've handled or seen in the past. So, yes, every patient I deliver, it's a stress. Yes, it's a happy stress, but it's a stress until the baby and the mother go back home happy and healthy. It's a sword on my head.
So yeah, so the reason I asked you to talk about this is because I think if you ask any common person in the street, they'll probably say that cardiologists or cardiac surgeons have the maximum stress,
They have stress too. I
because it's
agree.
directly related to life and death and so on. So and understandably so, and that's what the common person would feel, but they don't know what people like you go through, especially at 2 o'clock in the night, 1:30 at night. I don't know, the hours can really be, anything, right?
True.
But, I wanted to talk about women's health in general here, which topic which I know is very close to your heart. So let's begin with, taking your perspectives on women's health.
Okay.
And here, I can tell you very easily. The first thing you're going to say is, it's not the same. It's different across ages. I know that. So if you can please elaborate on, some of these issues some of the issues which women face at every stages. If you can talk about, things like nutrition, hygiene, etc. That
Correct.
gives
Correct.
a better picture of how to go about it. Over to you. All yours.
Uh, So, women's health encompasses a lot. It encompasses your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health. The physical health encompasses your nutrition, your hygiene. So, basically, like if we start from, like you said in the beginning, start from the very beginning. So, we are looking at, the young girls, the adolescents. For them, the health encompasses the start of their period cycle, which is called as menarche in our words, and making them understand what a menstrual cycle and what menarche is all about before they ever experience it on their own.
Right.
So that is a very important step which we ask all mothers, young mothers, teachers to help in school, at home, help them understand the whole process. So for adolescents, it would be understanding menstrual health, understanding the hygiene that goes with it, how to use certain products, when are you supposed to change certain products, and at the same time, like I always say when I give talks in schools, that I don't want to give a talk only to a girl, I want to give a talk to the boy too, because at that young age they need to understand what girls go through, have the
Right.
empathy towards them,
Correct.
right? So they can be extremely supportive in the coming years. And so in the adolescents, I would basically say menstrual health and menstrual hygiene.
Right.
They are, because of the hormonal changes, they are going to undergo a lot of body changes.
Right.
So understanding the body changes, and because of that, they do go through these mental upheavals, ups
Right.
and downs. They tend to be a little more aggressive. They tend to be sometimes a little more quiet and, go into their own shell. So understanding that they are doing this not because it's their personality, but because it's a part of the whole growing up process, is
Right.
important for their elders. So that's for the adolescents in short. For the women in their reproductive health, it's for them to understand what reproductive health is all about, like how
Right.
you understood menstrual health. uh, there are couples who need to understand if they want to conceive and have a pregnancy and start a family, what are the options that they have, how long can they wait. Similarly, the couples who do not want to start a family, and that's awesome too, that's perfect too, but what are the things that they can do to prevent the same.
Right.
And along with that, as a woman does age, and she starts crossing 35, 40, 45,
Right.
there are going to be certain changes in her again, the hormonal changes in her again, which happened when she was an adolescent. And because of those changes, the same process again starts. She needs to know what does she supposed to expect when she apparently hits something that is called menopause, which is at today's day and age the most talked about and spoken about topic, which is excellent. The fact that women are coming out and talking about menopause, talking about what they are going through,
Right.
is great. So it gives a platform to other women to understand the different things which can come along with it.
Correct.
Yeah, I guess that sums it up
Right.
for the three different age groups.
And in terms of mental health, I mean, you alluded to that a little bit when you
Yeah,
were talking to. I mean, I think during all these three stages, I mean, I'm sure there are many micro stages in there, but if we take
100%.
these as the three main stages, focusing on mental health is also very, very critical.
Crucial, extremely crucial.
So, are there any? And I know, there's no one suit fits all kind of a solution, but are there any uh, big guidelines that you would like to tell them? Maybe top three things that one should do to be able to manage this whole process mentally. I mean, is there something that you
So
recommend?
in any stage, whether it's adolescence, whether it's the reproductive age group, or whether it's the women around menopause, that's perimenopausal, the most important step is to one, be able to openly talk about what you're going through. So for a young girl to be able to openly talk about it to her parents, for a woman in a reproductive age to openly talk about it to her partner, and similarly in the menopausal age for a woman to openly talk about it to her partner or children, and discuss what she's going through, whether it's anger, whether it's irritation, whether it's getting flustered at the smallest thing. And I would prefer parents or partners to also educate themselves as to, what are the things that women go through. So if their partner is going through it, they can pick it up, even if she is maybe a little, turning a blind eye towards what she's going through. They are the ones who can pick it up and, say that, what you're going through this, let's go meet someone, let's go seek some help, let's go ask what else we can do. Because it's very easy to overcome these situations with a little bit of help, whether it's the help of a gynac or a psychologist, just that little push and you're good to go.
Right. In this respect, I think you and some of the people known to me, you guys are doing a lot
Yes.
in this area. Like, would you like to talk about that? I mean, you can just
So
what you do.
we have formed this group called Tvam. Okay. In Sanskrit, that means you. And we are basically a group where I'm a gynecologist, we have a dermatologist on board, we have a psychologist on board, and we have a physiotherapist on board.
Right.
And we are not only focusing on women per se, but the general mass, and to make them understand that one particular problem may require the help of three or four specialities, and to holistically look at a certain thing, it just makes it easier to sail the boat, go through the whole process.
So what do you do in this area? I mean, are you having conversations? Do you have?
We hold seminars in different corporates for their if they want it only for their women employees or for their women and men employees both. We are holding seminars in schools and colleges, for the teachers, for the parents, for the young girls of different age groups. And we are trying to basically spread awareness that holistic health is the way to look at health per se. If they do require any of us in person to help them out with certain issues, because we are all practicing doctors,
Right.
and we can do that also. But basically, our main aim is to spread health awareness in a holistic manner.
Okay, fabulous. I mean, I think that's much required, and I think if there are multi-speciality kind of an approach, then it's much better because the holistic view comes in. Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, so let's look at, I mean, and this is out of the discussions that we've been having. I mean,
Yeah.
4 broad areas of women's health.
Okay.
And I know that you are particularly passionate about these 4 areas, and you would like to
Okay.
do more work. So this intent is to try and see how much of an awareness or we can create out of this. So let's begin with the three. So these three, four broad areas are, of course, cancer, contraception, infertility, and cosmetic gynecology. So let's begin with cancer, because
Okay.
there's a lot of noise about cancer that women have, especially cervical cancer, which is picking up, and
Which took the world by
the
storm.
yeah, the statistics are scary, and
It is.
to say that India will have the single largest number of women with cervical cancer very soon, or we're heading that way, is a
Yes.
very scary situation.
It's unfortunate.
So, can you please talk to us about it? What is it that we can do? How do we prevent it, if we can prevent it, to whatever extent that is possible? And if you can tell us about this new vaccine that's there, and so you just create awareness a little more than what we can do.
So, when it comes to cancer related to my field, we are basically trying to help people assess and understand how easy it is, rather, to detect cancer if you do regular checkups. Now, what I mean by that is, if you're looking at breast cancer, we urge every woman above the age of at least 30 to go for a routine sonomammography of her breast, which is nothing but a sonography of her breast, on at least a yearly or an alternate year basis till the age of 40. After which, a mammography can come into the picture once in every 3 years. This is irrespective of a person coming with a positive family history, because that changes the timeline a little bit. The second thing that we are looking at is uterine cancer. And uterine cancer is something which can get picked up if you do regular sonographies of your pelvic area. And women who have reached menopause, in the sense who have stopped bleeding, understand that after you stop bleeding, you should never bleed in your life ever again, like not even a spot. So there are a lot of women who may have a little spotting 2 3 years after they have stopped bleeding, and they attributed it to kuch nahi hai, aaj thoda zyada kaam kar liya, or today I was a little more active, or it could be just a bruise, and they brush it off.
Right.
Those are the women who need to know that please don't brush it off. It's 90% nothing. We are hoping it's nothing, but
Thank God.
go to your doctor and get it examined. Find out why you've had even that one spot after your bleeding has completely stopped. So that's one thing. And the last thing is cervical cancer. Now, cervical cancer is one of the preventable cancers in the world, in our body. Okay. Cervical cancer is caused by a virus called as the HPV virus. And we do have a vaccine to prevent cervical cancer to the best of our ability. So it is really sad to see women getting cervical cancer, because it is a preventable cancer. The other cancers may not be preventable because they come with a lot of genetic hormonal changes. But cervical cancer is preventable to a large extent by taking the cervical cancer vaccine. There are a lot of cervical cancer vaccines in the market. There's just not one brand. There are a lot of brands. Obviously, your physician doctor will be the best person to guide you as to which brand you should ideally be taking.
Okay.
But cervical cancer vaccine is something we propagate after the age of 10 to 12 for young girls,
Right.
till the age of 45. We prefer them taking the vaccine before the age of 16, because then it's only 2 doses. After the age of 16, it becomes 3 doses. But 2 doses, 3 doses, take the vaccine. The earlier you take it, the higher the protection towards cervical cancer. And it used to be propagated as a cervical cancer vaccine because it's the HPV virus vaccine. But we have also found research that HPV virus also causes penile and anal cancer in men. So now we are giving the vaccine, and we are propagating it as an HPV vaccine per se, and giving it even to young boys and men. Because why should anybody have a cancer which is preventable, right? If you can protect yourself against it, protect yourself. And the other way that you can detect cervical cancer at a very early stage is by doing a simple pap smear, which is nothing but a OPD examination. It is not as painful as people believe it to be. It's literally a 5 minute process. You just need to go to your gynac once a year and get yourself papped. That's all. That's all.
Go to your gynac at least once a year and get yourself packed. I think that should be a tagline message. Okay, so there are two questions which have come onto the community group here. So
Okay.
I'll ask them in no particular order.
Sure.
So first is from Deepa Joshi. So her question is, what lifestyle changes can women make to reduce their risk of developing common cancers such as breast or ovarian cancer? So any common lifestyle changes? So that's the question.
So the best lifestyle changes that y'all can make is one, see to it that y'all exercise at least 20 minutes a day, at least 4 to 5 times a week. That just keeps your BMR and the cycle moving. Decrease the intake of as much as you can of fatty foods and refined flour. These are things which are small changes in your lifestyle, which can, in general, take you towards a healthier lifestyle. Yes, but also can help to a large extent when it comes to breast cancer.
Right.
Ovarian cancer, unfortunately, does not have any lifestyle changes which can per se prevent it. Ovarian cancer, the best way to detect it early, God forbid, if anybody does have ovarian cancer, is by doing a regular sonography on a yearly basis, which is a pelvic sonography. So that's what I tell all the women. Once a year, get a sonography of the breast, get a sonography of your pelvis, and get a pap smear. That's it. It's just once a year, and then you're done.
So there's a question from Gayatri Nair. He says, how should women approach the emotional and practical aspects of a cancer diagnosis, and what resources are available to support them?
So the resources available, there are a lot of cancer survivor groups. There are a lot of cancer caretaker groups which are available in general to everybody, which have a lot of support system in which they have people to help you understand how you should emotionally guide a cancer patient as well as a caretaker, because caretakers have their own set of stress that they are going through because they are dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, dealing with a patient on a day-to-day basis. So a caretaker group is a separate group. There's a separate way to be deal with them on an emotional level and understand each one separately as to what they are going through, how many cancer patients have they been taking care of, and what can they do to keep themselves in a good space so they can take care of.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and thank you for the questions, Deepa and Gayatri. Okay, so the next topic that out of those four broad topics that we thought of was contraception. So can you talk about that a little bit?
So contraception is basically a method which is used to prevent a pregnancy. There are a lot of contraceptives in the market. So basically, contraception is actually divided into two categories broadly, which is reversible and irreversible.
Right.
Irreversible is a surgical procedure which is performed on either the male or the female partner to prevent pregnancies in the future as much as possible. The reversible methods are simple, which is the most commonest use is a condom. You also have female condoms in the market, but they're not as much, as commonly used as the regular male condoms. Condoms are used, but condoms are not 100% safe, is what everybody needs to understand. So condoms do come with their side effects in the sense there are pregnancies which can take place even if you use a condom. Along with a condom, you have something called as intrauterine devices, which is there for the women, which have a higher protection rate compared to a condom. Intrauterine devices do not really harm the woman health-wise, but there are a small percentage of women who do not respond well to intrauterine devices. And when I say do not respond well, what I mean is they can have episodes of heavy bleeding, and hence the intrauterine device does need to be removed and taken out of that particular lady. And Similar to these things, you have the oral contraceptive pills, which are also freely available. You just need to know which is the correct pill for you, because there are certain pills which are for a certain age group. There are certain pills which can be taken by certain women after they've had certain amount of pregnancies, and looking at whether you are a diabetic, whether you have migraines, and XYZ.
Correct.
So those all these modalities are available. It is more important, very frankly, Vipul, for our younger generation to know that this exists, because how much ever we do expect to be Indians and be a very close knit community and follow a lot of norms, we do have to understand and accept that a lot of our younger generation is looking at the outside world, is looking at the Western world, is following a lot of those norms, and they do have a lot of queries about their own body. They self explore, they are getting into relationships. So it's better to be open with our children, understand where they're coming from, and be the first ones where they come and talk to us and explain to them what contraception is, and not be taken aback and say nahi na ye to nahi ho sakta, it's bahut chote hai. No, I agree they're chote, but be open about the fact that they are exploring themselves, and talk to them about it openly so they can talk to you about it openly.
Well said. Thank you. And I hope people who are listening to this, all those who have young children, don't just brush away these things. Whenever the child wants to approach them, be open to it. And of course, in case they need more expert help, you are always there. You can give them your email ID, and they can reach out to you and get
Absolutely.
appointment or whatever else. Okay. The third topic is infertility, which is also a huge issue, which is normally not discussed very openly. So, is there something that you would like to talk about it?
So
And
very
what
frankly,
can we do as society to help people with infertility deal with it better?
so infertility basically means a couple who's unable to have children very easily, right? And there are a lot of infertility couples who meet me, or the families who meet me and ask me, "Ke, why has the percentage of this particular issue increased in today's day and age? It was not as much before. Why is it there today?" What we need to understand is things have changed. All of us have changed in overall. We are more career oriented than we were before. Our biological clock, though, tends to remain the same. So women used to get earlier married at a younger age. Now they're getting married at 30, 35, which is great. And they're more mature to take on the decisions and understand things. But because of that, if they do delay pregnancies, they can maybe have certain issues. There is no norm that if you get married at 30 or 35, you'll 100% have issues in pregnancy. No, I have 40 and 42-year-olds who have conceived completely on their own without any help whatsoever, and have delivered beautiful babies. So there's no norm at all. But has the amount of infertility per se increased? Yes. Because infertility is also a lot to do with environmental pressure, right? We are going through a lot more stress today than our parents or grandparents per se ever did, when it comes to finances, or when it comes to simple basic living, or a stress among partners, or having time for each other. A lot of things, a lot of wheels turning at the same time. And basically, the most important thing you need to understand is that, one, if a couple is unfortunately facing infertility, to try and help them by understanding. So again, cutting things a little short, infertile couples are someone we deal with again holistically. They require emotional and mental support at the same time, because they are sometimes being drained emotionally, mentally, financially, everything. So creates issues between the couple. The family needs to understand that and support the couple as a whole, and because each one of them is going through it. It's not only the man or the woman, it's both of them together.
Right.
They both are trying for a pregnancy, for a baby. So and also understanding that there are a lot of modalities available in today's day and age. We are propagating today. If I go and talk to young girls, I am talking to them about something called as egg freezing, which was not something which was spoken in the past, and making them understand, because a lot of them have a lot of myths regarding egg freezing. If I freeze my eggs, then I have to get pregnant in a certain manner, or if I freeze my eggs when I want to get pregnant, they will be re-injected within me. These are myths which need to be broken.
Right.
Why egg freezing? Because if you do freeze your eggs, you do have the option of getting pregnant maybe, and trying for a pregnancy maybe at a later age.
Right.
Egg freezing on its own, Vipul, very frankly, is a massive topic to talk about.
Correct. It will
But
require a full podcast by itself. I'm sure.
true. But basically, the word egg freezing needs to be not told to people. They need to understand that something that like that exists. Is it an expensive procedure? Yes, it is. But there are a lot of ways out of that too. So yeah, that's infertility.
So there's a question from Varun Nanda here. I mean, I'll ask it. So the question here is, what are the most common causes of infertility? I mean, you alluded to some of them, but I mean, if there's anything that you have left out, and
Unfortunately, there are no common causes of infertility. Unfortunately, we do come to a point where we obviously investigate the male and female partner, but when we investigate the couple, sometimes, or rather most of the times, we find nothing wrong. Everything is going good in her, everything is going good in him, but they're just not being able to conceive. Okay. So what I tell a lot of my couples and who come to me now are that we go back to COVID. Okay. And when COVID struck us, we were all asked to shut down everything except emergency. Infertility is not considered an emergency process. So people who were in their IVF cycles were shut down midway, that we cannot do that because of COVID as it struck. What we did realize, and I'm talking out of personal experience, is that a lot of my couples under me who were at some point in some stage of infertility, undergoing IVF, undergoing IUIs, conceived on their own without anything, without any help from us within the first 6 to 8 months of COVID. And the biggest thing I attribute to this is stress. So what basically happened is the couples knew, "Kya re, you know what, nothing can happen now. No treatment can happen now." They basically started living as a proper couple again, enjoying the process of being together, enjoying the whole, act. Things just worked. Stress was taken away. Stress is one of the, I would attribute stress as the biggest thing for anything, but infertility in particular, because it does hamper my egg and sperm quality. So yeah, I hope that answers this question.
I hope Varun that has answered your question. Uh, well, there are, like you said, there are no specific
No specific.
reasons or common causes of it. So, we just need to move forward. If there is infertility, there's no infertility. That's the way. Okay, last one out of those four topics is cosmetic gynecology. And there is a specific question here which I will also take. So, so that you can maybe answer it as you go along.
Okay.
Uh, Let me find that there are lots of questions. Okay, I can find it right now. So, but I'll ask you as you go along. But if you can just tell us what is cosmetic. In fact, I heard it for the first time. To be very honest, when I read your introduction.
True.
So, if you can tell us what it is, and is it how common is it? What is the demand that you see for that kind of thing?
So cosmetic gynecology is not very commonly heard in India per se, but it is taking its baby steps into our country, and it is again broadly divided into the proper cosmesis, the non-cosmesis, if I may put it, if that's even a word, very frankly, where Coming to the cosmesis part, it's basically like a routine plastic surgery, like a plastic surgeon would do. So how you have women who go for breast augmentations, or you have men and women who go for facial augmentations with changing the way their nasal bone looks, or having fillers in certain places, which is great. And in a similar manner, you have cosmetic augmentation of your genital areas, which are done in women. So there are women who come want labial augmentations or clitoral augmentations, vaginoplasties, hymenoplasties. These are just terms which certain which go with certain procedures that we do and help women with. Saying that not every woman who enters and wants a certain procedure does actually require that procedure. So there are a lot of women who feel they require a certain procedure, but they actually do not. So they need to be understood and counseled, and made to understand that what is there is good, and we don't need to do anything further. But the women who want it, and it is going to help them even have a little better emotional stability, mental stability, that is what cosmetic gynecology is all about on
Right.
one aspect. And the other aspect is where we help women who are born without vaginas develop vaginas. Lot of anatomical variations which are seen, which we help correct. So that is the other aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't heard of it before, very honestly.
Sure.
This is the
I'm
first
sure.
time actually have heard something like this actually happens. Okay, so the question I have found it. So it's a
Okay.
question from Jenny Matthew. So her question is, Dr. Menon, how do cosmetic gynecology procedure impact women's physical and emotional health, and what should they consider before opting for such treatment?
Okay, so coming to the physical and emotional, they both are interlaced when it
Right.
comes to cosmetic gynecology. It's basically for women who feel that they are not happy with the way their private area looks, whether it is their clitoris, whether it is the size of their vagina, whether it is the size of the skin around the vagina, which we call as labia in our medical term.
Right.
And they are not happy with the way it either looks, or they are not happy with the way they feel concerning that particular area. So if any of those situations do arise, they need to meet their gynac, discuss it openly as to what part are they actually looking at. It could even be as simple as they are not having deriving sexual pleasure like they used to before.
Right.
And that could be one issue, and which is a very, very valid point. And it's great that people are actually coming out and talking about it and discussing about it. They need to just meet their gynac, discuss it openly, let her or him check uh, what the situation is, and then understand whether she actually requires the process. And if she does, then what does she require? And then take it from there. It gives them an emotional boost. Yes, a big emotional boost. Anybody would, right? Like, if I want to, you look at the outward face, and if I want to look good, and if there's somebody who likes putting a lot of makeup and looking good, there's nothing wrong in it. And at the same time, there is somebody who doesn't use makeup,
Right.
there's nothing wrong in that either. So it's both sides, it's both ways.
Good. Thank you. Okay, so there are a few questions on PCOD and PCOS, although we
Okay.
have not mentioned that, but I was expecting some questions come this way. So I'll ask those questions because
Sure.
the viewers have been kind enough to actually put them here. So the question is from Aisha Patel.
Okay.
So her question is, I wanted to know how is acne related
Acne.
to PCOD, PCOS, and what's the underlying connection?
Okay.
That's
So
question one.
okay.
Lakshmi Rajan has a similar question. Her
Okay.
question is, can acne caused by PCOD, PCOS be treated effectively? These
Cool.
are the two questions on PCOD,
Okay.
PCOS. There's one more, but these two are kind of similar. So I just thought I'll ask you any.
Okay. So basically, what everybody needs to understand is that PCOD and PCOS are the same thing,
Okay.
just two different names. It used to be known as PCOD, which is polycystic ovarian disease. And in today's day and age, we call it PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, because it's not a disease. That's the first thing. It's not a disease. 80% of Indian women have PCOS. It's okay to have PCOS as long as uh, what kind of PCOS do you have, which grade you're on, and it's very easily manageable. It's known as a lifestyle disorder.
Yeah.
Now, answering first the questions that you asked me related to acne. So it's called a PCOS, a syndrome, because it is basically a combination of various things, one of them being hormonal imbalance. So the hormonal imbalance is basically what causes the weight gain, the stubborn weight gain, as I may put it, the acne and the pimples, the hair fall or hair thinning, the mood disorders, because they tend to get aggressive or depressive, both in a waxing waning fashion. And at the same time, you will have 20 to 25% of women with PCOS showing you no symptoms at all.
Right.
Okay. And also menstrual, irregular cycles. Also another very, very common symptom of PCOS. So is acne related to PCOS? Yes, it is, because of the hormonal disturbance and the imbalance which is caused. Is it treatable? 100%. It is completely treatable. This is where a dermat and a gynac go hand in hand. And we work together on such girls and women, where from one end, I am trying to my best by balancing out the hormones and not necessarily give medication all the time, but there are other different ways also. And the dermat on his or her front is helping me deal with the acne from the dermat perspective by giving the creams, the oils, and whatever else is needed to help with the acne and the scars.
Right.
And the most commonest thing you actually see women having PCO come to you with is that, you know what, I tried losing weight, it didn't happen. The first thing any doctor I go to tells me is that, you know what, lose 10 kilos, lose 5 kilos, and come back and we'll see. It's frustrating for them to listen to this in and out,
Right.
because it's not that they're not trying. They are trying, but it's just stubborn weight. So they do require a little bit of push in other formats to help them, go through the whole PCO process.
It's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg. I mean, is it PCOD leading to weight gain or weight gain?
It's
Linked to it.
it's a vicious cycle. So we need to break it, and we break it at both parts.
So that was a question which Sakshi Shetty had. So
Okay.
she's saying, is the rise in PCOD, PCOS linked to sedentary lifestyles and poor diets? So I think that's the connection that uh, I was alluding to. So do you have anything to say on this? I mean, does
It is.
sedentary lifestyle and poor diets have anything to do with it?
It does. It does. So PCOS is known as a lifestyle disorder in particular because it is related to a lifestyle. So basically, this is how I normally explain PCO. That imagine the ovaries are throwing a party in your body, right? And none of the eggs want to leave that party. But one by one, you need to let the eggs go. So basically, what happens in PCO is that there is a disturbance in the ovarian morphology, the way the ovary looks and the ovarian size. And for a regular woman to get her cycles, she needs to ovulate every month. And what I mean by ovulate is she needs to throw out an egg from the ovary every month. And that is the only way she's going to get her cycle, because the uterus doesn't have a mind of its own. Okay, the egg enters, the uterus feels this woman will get pregnant. It forms a lining for that pregnancy, whether she's 15 or 50, doesn't matter. The egg decomposes and she throws the lining out, which is what we call a period or a menstrual cycle. In women or girls with PCO, what happens is that they do not ovulate regularly. The ovaries are slightly larger in most cases, which is due to the sedentary lifestyle. They tend to put on weight. Because they tend to put on weight, their ovaries also tend to get larger. also because of the hormonal imbalance that they are having. So the eggs do not get thrown out on a monthly basis. They're sitting there having fun. Until an egg gets thrown out, my uterus is not doing its job. It's not going to bring a cycle. And this is a stupid vicious cycle that they're dealing with. Related to diet, yes. In the recent years, we have come to know that there are certain products or certain food items which can hamper PCO to a certain extent, being fried stuff, being refined flour, being you're supposed to reduce the intake of cruciferous vegetables. So when I say that, I mean broccoli and cauliflower to say once a week, not as often as you would like it to be. Increase your protein intake, decrease your fat intake. That basically tends to cover.
I mean, when you're saying all this, all I can think of is, any doctor you meet today finally says, manage your lifestyle better, and you'll probably take
It's
care of
it's
many of
fortunately or
your
unfortunately
basic
true.
health problems. Yeah. I mean, somewhere all of these things are linked.
They do matter. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll take one question here from Shantanu Jadhav.
Yeah.
He had asked this question earlier, but during that discussion I missed out. So his questions are: what are the common side effects of hormonal contraceptives, and how can individuals determine if they are the right choice?
Correct. So, hormonal contraceptives, now there are a lot of good hormonal contraceptives in the market, which come with a very low dose of a certain hormone. Hence, the side effects to these hormonal contraceptives is very less. Initially, we used to see a lot of weight gain or headaches or mood swings with our hormonal contraceptives, and I'm talking about the hormonal pills, not the intrauterine device, because that is only locally active. But when I'm talking about the pills, we did see the side effects before. Today, with the newer generation contraceptive pills that we have, we rarely see any side effects. It's just that a contraceptive pill cannot be used by all women. There are a certain section of women, especially the ones who have history of cancer in their family, or who are migraine patients, or who are diabetics, who need to be given a certain combination of contraceptive pills, if at all. One of the biggest disadvantages, I would say, of the contraceptive pill is that you have to remember to take it. You have to take it every day at the same time for a particular number of days. And unfortunately, if you miss one pill or two pills, one, the woman can have breakthrough bleeding. That means she can suddenly start bleeding. And two, the efficacy drops drastically if you miss even one or two pills. So that is one of the biggest disadvantages. But if somebody is there who is comfortable and has put an alarm and now is part of her system to take the pill, it's absolutely fine. If there's somebody who's asking me about the eye pill, which is also very commonly
Commonly known.
commonly known and advertised, eye pill is not actually considered a contraceptive pill. Eye pill is basically a pill that you take, if you for any reason feel that there is even the slightest chance that the couple can be pregnant and they do not intend to keep that pregnancy, then eye pill is actually a wonderful product. But it comes with a lot of buts, and a but in capital, because it's a very, very high dose of hormone. So it does come with its set of side effects where the woman can go through changes in her hormonal cycle, and hence in the coming 2 to 3 months her menstrual cycle can be changed. Like, she can have heavy bleeding, she can have missed cycles, she can have mood disturbances. But is eye pill something that I would recommend? Yes, please take the eye pill if you feel that there's even the slightest chance of a pregnancy and you do not intend to keep it, because an eye pill is much, 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 much better than going in for an abortion in the future.
Thank you. So now we change tracks a bit and come to the main crux of why I'm talking to you. I mean, a lot of my uh, people who regularly listen to this podcast are wondering, why is a gynecologist here? The only reason you're here, Tushna, is apart from the fact that you're a damn good doctor, is that you are ACE Business Network. Okay, so that's the reason you are here. So please tell us a little bit about your experience as a business network.
Okay, so to put it that way, I am part of the of BNI, as some people may or may not know about it. How did I ever come to be part of it is a long story. Cutting it short, I was urged to be part of it by my brother and my husband, who were supportive and said, let's try it and go ahead and see how it works out. And that's how I joined the business networking platform in the first place. I didn't think a business networking platform is meant for a doctor. That was my outlook towards it when I joined, which has taken a 360-degree turn. And that is not the outlook today. But I also always feel that what is a business networking platform going to help a doctor, because I don't consider my profession as a business. But when I did join BNI changed my perspective towards it, changed my outlook towards it. The people I met in BNI, so what happens in a networking platform is you meet people from different backgrounds and fields that you never even know existed, at least for me, because I'm in this bubble of medicine and doctors and stuff like that. So I didn't know a lot of fields which existed, which I met people from. And you learn a little bit from each person. You learn how to do your business in every perspective from each person. Everyone has their own way to look at it. And that is what BNI has actually taught me. So, like I say, you may be the best at what you do, but that's of no use unless people know you exist. So, being there as a part of BNI made people realize that I exist. A lot of them helped me understand that I can do something like corporate workshops, which I do very regularly now. Take talks in schools, take talks in colleges, uh, help spread awareness, which is my main thing, that I want people to be educated. That's all, and understand. It's not that they have to come to me; they can go to anyone, but get yourself checked and be educated about it. So BNI has helped me understand how I can do that. So yeah, it's amazing being a part of a business networking platform.
You're not actually part of it. You actually took on a leadership role. So, you led an entire chapter of about 120, 25 people for a good 6 months.
Yeah.
So, I mean, leadership and medicine and, gynecologist. How did that happen? And what lessons did you learn along the way?
It happened with a lot of persuasion and a lot of people, two people in particular, who said that I have to take up the role. At that point of time, I think I abused them tremendously. Today, I thank them a lot. And on retrospect, those 6 months as taking up the leadership role, of course, takes away a lot of your time, because you do have to give that X amount of time to the platform you're working for, along with the work that you're doing. So, along with being a doctor, handling the house also, and doing this extra work for BNI, very frankly, I understood and I learned time management, something that I was extremely poor in. And I learned how I can, give my time in this place and that place, try and do the best I can for all three worlds. And it helped me connect with people at a different level. Because when you're at that leadership role, people look at you a little differently, even if they have known you for a few years prior to that. And it helped me connect with literally every person in the room at a very different level. I had different connections with them. Today, I know that I can call them up even at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they will be there for me. And they can call me up even at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be there for them. So a leadership role did help me in that way. It helped me connect with people from other chapters and help me understand and network further. So it was not only networking in those many people, but helping and meeting other doctors who I didn't know existed, from other sections of Bombay, which is great for us, right? The more doctors we know, the better it is for us and easier for us to help our patients. So it helped me that way.
Fabulous. Okay, so we're just coming to the close of the hour as such. So one last question, Krishna, before we let you go to your patients. So how do you see the future, both in terms of being a doctor and a business networking professional? And how do you see yourself, in the years to come?
How do I see myself? Well, as a doctor, I hope to achieve much more than I already have, help many, many more women. My goal is to have this one place where, a woman can come and get everything done. She doesn't need to run from place to place. That is my one of my ultimate goals. So I hope to achieve that someday. And from the business perspective, it's a constant learning process. So as a medical professional, we say that you never stop learning. There's always something new coming up in our profession. If we don't keep ourselves abreast with the new knowledge, it's unfair to the patients. So similarly, on the business perspective, you just learn more and more every day from every business person you meet. The way they run their business, the way they look at things, makes you realize how you can maybe do better in the position you are. So
Thank you. And one last question. Okay, one last one. So, any last or parting words, as they say, for young people who might be thinking whether they should take up medicine? There's been a lot of discussion around that, especially given the recent incidents around doctors, and so a lot of people are skeptical whether they should take up medicine. Uh, so, any parting words that you have for uh, youngsters, and also any words that you may have to say about business networking for people who want to consider joining a business network like BNI?
so parting words for young people who want to join medicine: if you are genuinely passionate about it, if you really understand what medicine is all about before you join it, please join medicine. Please, it's a wonderful place to be in. Don't join it just for the glam. If that is what you've seen big doctors doing really well, having a lot of patients, walking out of Mercs and Audis. You will get there, but there is tremendous amount of hard work which goes behind all that, which is in every field, not only in medicine, but in every field. You have to learn to work and work your way up. But if you are actually passionate about medicine, I always say meet a doctor. I get a lot of young people from colleges who come and meet me to understand what medicine is all about. I make them meet my colleagues from different fields because we all have a different perspective about what we do. And so meet us, understand what medicine is, what doctorate is. Don't get into it because my parents think I should become a doctor, or my grandfather's dream was I should become a doctor. If that is the reason you're getting in, then great, be focused about it, but do it to be happy in what you do. There are a lot of our friends and colleagues who've entered medicine and then left it midway because they realize it's not their calling, which is great because they learned, understood it midway, and went where they should be. So be happy, choose it. It's an amazing field to be in. It's great to interact with patients. So yeah, I always say choose medicine if that's what you want. And from the business networking part, it's amazing. Everyone who is doing some kind of business, however small or big, being a part of a business networking network helps. It's just you have that many more ears and eyes spreading your word around. Today, if I am getting X number of patients, it's all because of people who know me, who have been treated by me, who have come to me, who are spreading my word around, which is I'm ever grateful for. And in a networking platform, that is what helps you. You have that many eyes and ears spreading your word around if you're good. So it always helps you grow. Yeah.
Business networking always helps you grow. Thank you very much for that, Krishna.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for being very, very gracious with your time. I know when I asked you for an hour, I was a little worried whether you would be able to spare that kind of time. But you did. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me.
I
Truly.
hope our listeners have got some great insights. If with your permission, I'm happy to post your uh, contact details
Sure.
on the group so that in case anybody wants to reach out to you, they can do that. So if you
Sure.
can just let me know what you would like to mention. If it's an email ID, please you can say it right now so that people wants to note down, they can do that. I'm not sure whether you want to
I'll
share
send it
your
across
phone
to
number,
you.
but that's all right. And that's perfectly fine.
I'll share it with you. I have no issues at all.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And see you soon.
See you. Bye. Thank you.